Good evening. My name is Alon Crawford. I'm a very proud alumna of Columbia University Teachers College, and I'm currently the Senior Associate Dean of Student Affairs at the School of Professional Studies. Welcome to the forum, and thank you for spending your drizzly New York City evening with us. We are celebrating the launch of Dr. Beth Fisher-Yoshida's new book, New Story, New Power, A Woman's Guide to Negotiation. This event is another example of SPS's commitment to supporting workshops and programs that teach, educate, and address the critical needs of professionals in diverse industries. As a result of both their classroom experience and education and participation in lectures like this, workshops, and other programs, it enables our graduates to be agents of change within their respective fields. Beth's research, leadership within SPS, her engagement with students, and the launch of her new book is one example of the diverse ways our faculty impact the SPS community. On a personal note, I've been at the university for 8 years. I like to introduce myself as a recovering business school dean. I joined SPS 2 years ago, and Beth was on my search committee, so thank you for hiring me. Over the course of the last 2 years, her support of me has been unwavering. We've been in meetings together. We are traveling to Asia next week. She will be at a conference and then also doing a presentation at Benue University, and I'll be meeting with alumni and recruiting the next generation of SPS students. We've also been on the dance floor together, so I'm happy to share that story a little bit later. But next, I will turn it over to another amazing and accomplished leader in her own right, Wendy Bellsberg, 2010 NECR alum, who will introduce Beth. Please join me in welcoming Wendy.
Hello. I'm a graduate of Barnard College and then came to Columbia to join the very first cohort of the master's program in negotiation and conflict resolution. So I've known Beth a very long time, and it speaks to everything about her that we started as she was first a teacher, and then a mentor, and then a friend. And Beth has defined in her book what negotiation it means, redefining it in a way to understand that the word negotiation doesn't just happen in boardrooms or in classrooms, but that any person who has a child, a friend, a life partner, a business partner, is engaged in a negotiation every single day of their lives. That includes everybody in this room. So as Beth says, that this is a direct quote from her book. She explains that a successful negotiation is not only about the outcome, but about the process we take in getting to that outcome. Beth's resume exemplifies one long, successful negotiation. Her many accomplishments, too numerous to list here, include her position as a faculty member and director of the master's program here, as vice chair of faculty at Columbia School of Professional Studies, as co-chair of AC4, and as a principal in her own consulting firm where she teaches communication and negotiation skills to not-for-profits, to government agencies, to military, to schools, all so that they can improve their negotiation and communication skills. In addition to juggling her teaching and her clients and her administrative responsibilities, she is also a mother of 2 daughters, a grandmother. She loves to travel. She's working on a novel set in the 16th century Venice. And yes, we're here to celebrate the book that she just wrote. So if that's not a testament to how a person negotiates, I don't know what is. Beth was ahead of her time in realizing that a book specific to women is necessary, welcome, and a well-timed addition to a shelf on which there was previously a gaping hole. There was no one in this room, including the men, who won't benefit from her book and from her insights. It is a how-to on a granular level. It also sheds light on the larger societal messages that women absorb. It is practical for its specific day-to-day advice and suggestions, and very empowering for everyone who wants to understand the patterns they find themselves in. I'm going to turn you over to Beth and just say that if everybody in this world were to read her book, the world would be a much better place. So I encourage all of you to buy the book.
Maintenance person, although my kids might disagree. But I really do need to thank a lot of people, and people who know me also know that I'm not detail-oriented or thorough, so I'm probably going to leave some people out. I do want to thank Sharon Kim and Kirsten Pugh, who work with me in the program and with spearheading this whole event, so thank you very much. Connie's son is somewhere in the Connie's in the audience, and Connie helped start the program with me. Thank you very much. And I know there are lots of teams that worked on this. There's a creative team and the events team and all the leadership in the school. And I'm probably forgetting people, but a lot of family and friends and all of you here tonight. So thank you very much. And I'd like this to be kind of conversational. If you want to say something while I'm talking, raise your hand, we'll call on you. But there is a Q&A afterwards. So let's get started. You already know the name of the book, so I don't need to go there. And then really just taking a look at what we're going to talk about tonight. So why this book? I'll just establish why this book and why this book now. And several people have asked me that. I'm not sure my answers are consistent, but I say whatever's in the moment. And really, it comes out of my practice observations when I worked in workshops and organizations with students in the program, coaching women. And also then I looked into doing research to really explore further some of the phenomenon that I was noticing with women. And then talking a little bit about conceptual foundation. This is a university, so we are going to talk a little bit about concepts and theories that informed my practice. And really looking at the phases of a negotiation and why I pay attention to each phase as something different that all comes together. Looking at a case study. In the book, there are case studies, and I pull out some example of a case study just to show you what I'm talking about a little bit. And then summarizing, and then afterwards I get to sit here with Kat and answer questions. And I also wanted to thank Zalon and Wendy for the lovely introductions. So let's get started. So why this book? Well, more recently, and I don't know from when, because again, I'm not detail-oriented, there's been a lot of focus on women, helping women be successful in organizations and communities and life and so on, politics. So why not about women, right? And really thinking about negotiation as a vehicle to help women achieve their outcomes. We don't have to call it negotiation, but I am, but it's also communication, interaction, relationship building, through the guise of negotiation. And it's really looking at cultural and systemic phenomenon that inform women and inform individuals and individuals' personal stories. We'll get into that a little bit. And really about changing the narrative. We all have stories that we carry with us from when we were first born, growing up, from our families, our communities, our education, the society, in today's world, the social media phenomenon that's around. How do these stories help us? And how do they get in the way of us being more successful? We'll look at how do you change those narratives. And that was something I was very interested in my practice and in my research. And really about skill building, growth, and development. So I wanted to write a book that was practical, that anybody, and it's not only for women, even though it's about women, anybody can pick up the book and say, okay, what can I learn? What kind of tools can I use? How can I better prepare for my negotiations? And I think it's in the book. And really about building confidence and self-esteem, because that's really most of it. If you talk yourself out of a situation before you get into it, you've already lost because you can't show up in your full self with your full abilities. So the question would be really, how can women increase their self-confidence and skills when negotiating? So here are some practice and research observations. I was coaching and I taught lots of women in lots of workshops. And I've interviewed lots of women too, and I categorize women in like junior, like under 5 years of experience, or mid-career, like 10 to 15 years, or women who are senior in their careers, 25 plus years. I also did a specific study on women working in STEM professions because that has a male-oriented, male-dominated field. And then the main findings were women want to perform well. I mean, who would not want to perform well, right? And so some women have confidence, but they lack the skills, or they have the skills, and then the system around them or the other people they're negotiating with, they find challenging, even though they feel skilled before they get to the table. And then others don't have the confidence and the skills. Very often, some younger women especially would say, I don't know enough, I'm not experienced enough, how can I ask for that? And there are books that have been written which say women don't ask. Well, now women are told to ask, but they don't necessarily have the confidence and skills to ask. So there's a lot of contradictory messages that are out there. And there are a difference between the women. I found that I think women who are junior in their careers are more similar to other people junior in their careers than they are necessarily to women who are senior in their careers. Women who are senior in their careers already have a lot of confidence and experience that they can overcome some of the obstacles they may have had when they were younger. And that there were specific strategies used by some women who work with a lot of men in male-dominated fields. The STEM professions are a little bit less dominated by men now, but still dominated because a lot of attention have been given to Girls' Code and lots of other organizations to help women become comfortable in the maths and sciences, because a lot of them were told that women are not good or girls are not good at math and science. So some of the conceptual framework, really looking at negotiation itself, the basic concepts, how we differentiate things. And one of the questions I like to ask is, what's really going on here? Because sometimes people get upset about things and I think, really, that seems like very trivial. What else is going on? It's not trivial for that person, but the presenting issue doesn't seem that major. And really about communication is that we are in relationship, and how we communicate affects the quality of our relationships. And narrative, I mentioned before that we carry lots of different stories with us from families, schools, communities, the media around us, and all of that helps create our individual stories that we carry with us. And I like to say sometimes, you know how you're mature and you're an adult and you're professional and you've gained so much, and then you go home for family holiday dinner, right? And everybody laughs, oh yeah, the family dinner, and you're 10 years old all over again. And those stories about who you were as a 10-year-old are still very alive for other people, even though you say, no, I've changed, I'm an adult now, I'm professional. And then emotions, really about the social construction of emotions, and I find that interesting too, is that emotions are not necessarily universal, they happen in relationship, and our brains track all that and budget energy for us to deal with our emotions. So that's kind of interesting, I thought, too. And then the whole idea about power. In fact, I think today, I was doing some kind of broadcast earlier today, and somebody asked about power, and traditionally we think of power as power over. And I like to think of power with. And one of the things I had mentioned, which I like to think about too, is if I'm in a relationship and I'm in negotiation and I want power with, how can I make you look like a hero? Because if I make you look like a hero, that also helps me too. So it's that whole concept of we, which they say women are good at, right? We and our and community. And also about the neurosciences and the habits that we form create these patterns in our brains, and that influences our behavior. So how do we change those patterns? By changing the words that we're using, by changing the stories that we tell ourselves and tell about ourselves. So in the different phases of a negotiation, there are four. There's the initial framing of the negotiation. What's the presenting issue? Because the presenting issue is not necessarily what's really going on here. Who are the parties involved, directly and indirectly? I've been in situations where I think you're working with the decision maker and somebody from outside says, no, don't do that. And like, who is this person? Because they're not necessarily the decision maker, somebody else comes in. And then the time frame. Is it one negotiation? Are you under time constraints, time pressure? Do you have time to negotiate longer period, and so on? And is this the first time you're meeting, or is it repeated engagement? Do you know the person who you're negotiating with, or is it somebody that is unknown to you, but you know people like them? And then the preparation, and I always talk about self-awareness practices, because you need to know who you are and who you're bringing into the negotiation before you negotiate. Because if you don't do that, then you're not going to be able to gauge the reactions you're getting, and it's going to be hard to know the other person if you're not knowing yourself, because I think of negotiation as relational. The process is, how do I manage myself during the negotiation? And if you do some good preparation, then you have some strategies, some tactics you can use that if you get a little bit imbalanced during the negotiation, because maybe something emotional happens to trigger you and you lose your focus, what do you need to do to get yourself refocused in that situation. And then the post-negotiation, which is a very important phase that a lot of people don't follow up with, and that is really assuring that everything you agreed to, that you're on the same page to what you agreed to during the negotiation gets reinforced. So there has to be a follow-up because remember, it's relational, so the negotiation lives on even after you leave that negotiation table. So the phases are important. So now I'm going to share one of the case studies that's in the book, and I pulled out one sort of concept or tool from each of the phases. It's a family dynamic. I think you all have some kind of family relationship, right? This is a situation where there's a brother and a sister, and their mother died a few years ago, and their father has beginning signs of dementia. So Sam is the brother, and he believes that his father is rapidly deteriorating and should not live alone, and that he needs to go into an assisted care facility, and he has a very busy career and travels a lot, so he doesn't really have the time to take care of their dad, and he wants to get it soon because it's very competitive and hard to find a good facility. But the sister Sheila, who's older than Sam, believes dad still has his wits about him, and he's just going through a normal aging process, and he's also grieving the loss of his wife after 45 years, and she thinks he can stay in the house, and she'll just help him a little bit. So you can see right away that Sam and Sheila have a very different opinion about what's happening with dad. Now, I'm not sure if they're really asking dad, but they have the conversation with themselves, right? So we're doing some preparation. We do something called a daisy model, and we see Sheila taking care of dad, and we see all the different petals around the center of the daisy. And all the petals around the center really show the different influences that Sheila has on why she's forming the opinion that she's forming. So she does this before she engages with Sam so she can get to know herself better in the ideal world, right? So she's really talking about the fact that she is a working mom, she does work, she takes care of her kids, and she has limited finances, and she knows a lot of friends are facing similar decisions about their parents too. And so she wants to work and take care of her dad part-time. She doesn't want him to go into a facility because she feels that he's been in this house for so long, it would really disorient him more to go into a facility. Sam, on the other hand, has a different attitude about the situation. Sam feels that, he has the money to give, he doesn't have the time, he'd rather pay for the facility if Sheila is strapped for money, and Sam wants him to be in a facility. He has very limited free time, and he also has his personal life. He's trying to develop a relationship, have a family of his own. So they have very different competing demands. They are in very different positions in their life, and they have very different interests, although they both care very much and love their father, right? So during the process of the negotiation, we have sometimes what are called unwanted repetitive patterns. You know how you sometimes get into a loop? You may say to yourself, don't go there, and then the other person says something and you go right there where you don't want to go. So this is what happens with Sam and Sheila. So Sheila says, well, I'm the older sister and I've always taken on more responsibility than you, Sam. And Sam says, well, I have the financial means to implement putting dad into an assisted living facility. And so Sheila says, well, money's not everything. I chose to put my career on hold and have a family. So maybe Sheila's feeling a little bit of guilt that she hasn't developed her career as much as Sam did. And Sam says, well, I'm young, single, and I want to live my life. And then they go back in this loop over and over and over again, which is not really dealing with the issue at hand. So we have to figure out, how do you break into those unwanted repetitive patterns? In any one of those turns in the conversation, either one of them could have done something different or said something different. If they went through the preparation phase, they would know, I'm not going to get caught up in that. And it's not enough to just say that. You have to say, okay, if this happens, then what do I do? So if Sheila goes to her spiel about she's always taking responsibility, what can Sam say to take that away? Maybe, yes, Sheila, I do appreciate what you've done. You've done a lot for Dad, or something to that effect, and Sheila might be, right, unguarded. Okay, so now we have post-negotiation, and it's very important to take notes and specific steps because there's so much information that gets exchanged during the course of a negotiation. People leave thinking they're agreeing to the same thing when in actuality they may not be agreeing at all to the same thing. So Sheila needs to recognize how far Sam has come and that he really is a partner to her. He's not just the kid brother. He's not the younger brother anymore. He's a grown adult managing a very successful career. And Sam needs to recognize Sheila's efforts and step up the role he claims he wants. He may say, I want to be involved and I want to do different things. But in actuality, is he really showing up? So that Sheila can say, okay, Sam is showing up, then I guess I can relax a little bit. So this is a long overdue conversation between the siblings, because they're in, they're in their 30s or something, and they haven't really had this kind of a conversation before. And so that's why they keep repeating the same patterns and having the same biases against each other. And family dynamics are layered and complex, aren't they? So this would be the first of a series of conversations that Sam and Sheila have to have about Dad. Of course, it would be really good if they had Dad in the conversation as well, to ask Dad, what is it that you want? And for those of you who work in elder care, elder mediation, and so on, we know that sometimes the older person can be in the room and nobody talks to the older person to get his or her opinion. They just make decisions about them as though they're not there, which is a very disempowering situation. So in summary, both Sam and Sheila carry stories from their childhood about who they are in relation, and who they are in relation to their parents and to each other. They needed a structured process to develop a deeper sense of who they are before engaging with each other. What I would recommend to them, if either of them asked me, is you probably need a negotiation coach to help you through the process, to prepare for this, and help you deal with the emotional part of engaging with your sibling. And they realized that these historic stories had changed, but they were not fully recognizing the changes, and this affected their dynamics and their ability to really be fully present for their dad and seeing what their dad needed. And by taking the time to more deeply explore their emotional attachment to these stories and to each other, they're able to move into a more relational dynamic, a healthier, more constructive relational dynamic, because they took the time to understand themselves and then understand each other. And that's it. Thank you, and we'll open it up for Q&A now. Okay?
Good evening, everyone. They say that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I don't know if you noticed, but I'm kind of on brand with the chairs in this auditorium. Do you think the auditorium is flattered? I'm so excited to be sitting here with Beth. We had offered the opportunity for everyone here to submit their questions in advance, and I will be moderating those questions for you. So I will be receiving them through my phone, and I'll be sharing it with Beth. Now, forgive me if you see me look down my phone. I promise you I am not looking at TikTok. Every single time I listen to hear Beth talk, and also reading her book is really like listening to her lecture. It kind of gives you that main character energy that I am so ready. I could go out there and do anything and get what I want. So one of the first questions that I have is, well, first of all, talk about the main takeaways, about 3 main takeaways, or however you want to summarize, just, what you want people to leave with reading your book.
3? Okay, let's see. 1 would be really developing a sense of self-awareness and agency, and that we all have an ability to make a difference if we put our mind to it. The second would be that there are very practical tools in the book that I intentionally included in there because I wanted people to really have something very tangible to work on. And the third probably would be, do not go and negotiate with the most challenging person in your life over the most challenging issue to begin with. Start small, start simple, even like, what are we eating for lunch tomorrow? Because you really want to build those little wins to build confidence to go up to the more challenging negotiations. I like 3s, things in 3s.
All right. So given all of the research, you've done all the research, you have authored a lot of studies and taught negotiation, and even for women, right? We know that we see a lot of women leaders, and women are becoming more educated than we have historically. Why do you think women still shy from the idea of negotiation? And even, like you said, it's just a communication, a conversation, or even framing an ask, just going in to ask for what we want. Why is it so difficult for women?
Well, simple question, lots of different answers, very complex. So sometimes it's not necessarily difficult for the woman, it's difficult for the other person if they don't recognize the woman and if people feel threatened by it. I think also that when you think about the social media and the social stories that we hear so often, it's very contradictory. And so I think a lot of women are also confused about things because, you know, the rhetoric about what we should be doing and then everything else in society is not necessarily in the same place. So for many years, as I mentioned, that there's a lot of stories, women don't ask, women don't assert themselves, women don't advocate. But women are also taught to be likable, to be acceptable, to be nice, to be nurturing. So, of course, they're going to take care of the other person, which is not a really good thing to do completely in a negotiation, because if you're only taking care of the other person, you're not taking care of what you need in the negotiation. But then you have all of this other information. If you look at the popular business books, it's all about, you know, and get out there and fight and do what you want and everything, insert yourself and ask for what you want, sort of. And so there's conflicting messages, because even though those messages are there and maybe women want to assert themselves and they learn the skills, I think the systems that they're working within and the people paving the way for other women are not necessarily there. So that's where it gets to be a little bit challenging. And just one more thing is, a few months ago, I was at a negotiation conference, and there's somebody who's expert negotiator, and he said, "Really, Beth? Women still have trouble negotiating?" And I'm like, "Yeah, really, you know." That's what happens.
Well, building off of that, there is a question here, but I wanted to ask you, building off of that, what do you recommend women can do to reconcile the contradictory messages that we are receiving, right? And also not getting in our own way when it comes to engaging in these kinds of important conversations?
So I think tact is really important, right? So you have to know what you need, you have to know the skills, you have to practice all of that, but you have to know the other person and know how to be in relationship with the other person and to frame things in a way that the other person can hear it the way you want to be heard. You also have to know what's important to you. And I always say to people, you can compromise as much as you need to, but don't compromise yourself or your values. So you have to know when to walk away from a situation. If it's not healthy, it's not safe, it's not good, then you need to end and walk away from that. So everything is not necessarily negotiable, and you need to know what those times are.
We have a question from the audience. What are some strategies that women or anyone can utilize in situations where past narratives can, I guess we sort of answered this, can get in the way of them implementing a successful negotiation?
Well, first you have to know what those stories are. You have to know what's getting in my way. So if you identify something like, for example, maybe, oh, I turn red very easily, you know, and then somebody says something in the room and you're turning red, then you think, oh no, I'm turning red, I can't do that. Then just let yourself turn red, because that's what your body's doing, you're turning red, but you can still stay focused. And I think you have to have some kind of, like I say, something in your pocket. So a question that you might ask the other person that helps you buy time. So they're answering the question and you're getting information, but you're also giving yourself a chance to calm down and get recentered. So any kind of those old stories, or maybe you had a negotiation that was not successful in the past, and then you come back and you go, there it is again, I'm not successful again. Well, that's not a helpful story, right? So you have to say, okay, don't go there. And in something like in Getting to Yes, there's something about going to the balcony, you have to take that meta perspective and say, whoa, what's going on here? This is not what I want. And then you sort of come back down, don't stay in the balcony, come back down and be there in the negotiation, and then regroup, you can carry on.
So the last 3 years, we all know where we were the last 3 years, the pandemic hit. What do you think with the pandemic, has it shifted the way women engage in the workplace? With the work trends, we're seeing quiet quitting, you're seeing the great resignation, and I heard a new term, what was it called? Resenteeism. I'm not even sure what that means. But
Resenteeism?
Yeah, I guess you resent your workplace. But with that in mind, do you think there is a shift with women's mindset? And do you think that women have felt more emboldened to negotiate given all those shifting trends?
I think not, because I've also heard the other side of the story where it's been more challenging for women during the pandemic, especially those who are mothers who have little kids at home, because they've had to be in the workplace and be home. And a lot of managers in general have had a hard time managing performance remotely. They don't know how they can measure a person's performance. Because even though if you're physically in the workplace, I mean, you could be doing anything at your desk, right? You don't really have to be doing the work assignment. You could be online unless your company has a policy where they don't let you sort of roam around the internet and so on. But we don't really know. But that we say, okay, the person's at the desk doing work, obviously showing up. But now in your home, you know, and maybe you're just, of course, you're on Zoom, so you could be wearing pajamas on the bottom, it doesn't matter. But now when you're home and maybe you hear somebody in the background, so now you're wondering, is this person really taking their work seriously? So I don't remember all the statistics, but I know I've read where women have been disadvantaged by the pandemic and by their work at home. So I don't think everybody's been emboldened. On the other hand, I have to say also knowing from students coming into the program who are working professionals that people are a little bit more particular about what they want. So maybe on the other hand, there are some women who are maybe saying, well, I need to work remotely because I have a family, whatever it is, and they're asserting themselves a little bit more. So I think it's really more of a mixed bag. And I don't think we know fully the effects of the pandemic yet, but we're seeing it in all different parts of our lives.
That's very true. We have another question. Can you expand on the differences in negotiation styles depending on where a woman is in her career?
So in general, from the research, from junior, mid-career, and senior women, I would say that the junior women are a little bit more insecure or overly assertive in the sense where I'm going to get what I want and I'm going to go in there, but they don't necessarily have the language or the tact or the relationship to do it, so they sometimes make situations worse. It could be one of the two. And I think women in the mid-career, sometimes struggle because they've risen in their careers, but sometimes they hit that glass ceiling or they're not quite sure where to go, and can they keep going up or should they also expand in different ways? They have people reporting to them, so they have to be responsible for other people. They're still pushing the upper limits. So that's, I think, the mid-career, probably the most challenged. And then for women's senior career, they're really thinking about what have I accomplished, what's my legacy, and then they're mentoring. So it's a very different space that women who've already been working for 25 plus years are in, I think, than the junior women in mid-career.
That is very, very true. So do you think the women would that shift then, I guess, if you're moving from junior into a more senior, then you would be more concerned about your legacy as well in that scenario?
I think so. You know, different priorities at different stages of our lives, right? And as those shift, then so does how you show up in the workplace shift too. And I would hope, I mean, of course, this is just generalizations, right? I haven't interviewed every woman on the planet. But if you are not satisfied with your career and you become working like a senior career woman more than 25 years, then you have other issues to fulfill, to make yourself feel comfortable. But sometimes you can still mentor, and that also is a very fulfilling way, even if you haven't achieved everything you wanted in your career. Giving back in different ways and helping other women succeed is also very valuable.
Another question here, what are some interesting findings from the interviews that you conducted? Was there anything that surprised you? That was actually one of my questions. Was there anything that really blew your mind away during this particular research?
No, not really blew my mind away, but it was interesting to notice the patterns. That was very interesting. It wasn't where I got so many different stories, you know, because as I continued to interview, then I started to see certain patterns coming up, and so there were these different kind of groupings. So that wasn't necessarily surprising, but it was just sort of like confirming that there's a shared experience with women at different stages of their careers. The thing that was also interesting was in the STEM professions, when I interviewed women who work in predominantly male-dominated professions, that the senior women really had accomplished quite a bit because they were in those professions for 25 years, achieving leadership roles in there. And so that was interesting too, because they are paving the way for others, and they felt that sense of responsibility as well. So they weren't only advocating for themselves, they were also advocating for the future women coming into those professions. So I thought that was interesting.
You know, what was interesting in your book was that you covered the neuroscience and the neuroplasticity. Could you talk to us a little bit about, I personally thought it was interesting, so if it's a little selfish to ask this question and no one else is interested, please, can you elaborate a little bit why you think that's critical in negotiation?
So the expression, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, is really not completely true, because we still have malleability in our brains, so we can learn new things. So what happens is, with the language that you're using, the habits that you're having, it creates sort of like tracks or grooves in your brain, and the more you have a habit, the deeper the pattern, the deeper those grooves are. So if you're trying to change a habit, then you have a harder time because you're changing it. What did surprise me with this, which I thought was, oh my God, is that our brains communicate with each other without us being conscious of it. So right now, our brains could be having this whole other level of communication, and I'm like, oh my God, that is so scary, because I don't know what my brain's doing, right?
Yeah,
and it's communicating with other people, so that was surprising to me.
Yeah, I did read that. That was wild. What am I thinking? I thought, yeah.
Like the great Karnak, I don't know what you're thinking, Kat.
So thinking about just gender stereotyping and gender classifying, do you think the changes to where we are in the current landscape, there is more push for or more demand for inclusivity and more diversity, equity? Do you think that now that we are more, do you think there will be less stereotyping in that scenario now that, there is more acceptance of the gender fluidity and the rise for more of the demand to have more of the inclusivity?
Well, I think it depends on where you are in the country or where you are in the world. Being in New York is a little bit of a bubble. We forget the rest of the country too. But there's the whole idea of intersectionality as well that I think is very important, because a white woman's experience and a woman of color, different ages, have different experiences in the workplace and in life. So they negotiate differently. So even if you are comfortable with who you are and you know who you are and you enter into a situation, you're already being judged and framed in a certain way based on your appearance. So if you are a younger person or you are an older person, depending on how you show up, people already have opinions formed about what that means and then how they're going to negotiate with you. So I think there is more acceptance in some ways, but it's not widespread, and it's, I think, situational.
That's a very good point. So you also talked about in the book the short-term and long-term goals when it came to negotiation, which I thought was very interesting, and how we often tend to focus on the short-term goals. So talk to us a little bit about the long-term and why that's important into when it comes to engaging in negotiations, that not everything has to be about the immediate goals.
Yeah. So if you are really thinking about a relationship with somebody, and you're thinking about multiple interactions, multiple negotiations, if you have a goal for the first negotiation to get some kind of an outcome, it depends on what that outcome is. If the goal is just to engage and get to know each other a little bit, then you're building towards that longer term effectiveness. But if you try to win things in that first interaction, it's not going to work. So many years ago, I lived in Japan, and I remember that people would come and they would want to do business, and they'd want to just get the negotiation out of the way, and then we'll just go out and celebrate. And I'm like, that's not going to happen, because you have to get to know people, you have to build a relationship. So the whole sense of time was very different. In this country in general, I think we're very short term. We want it now, very action oriented and so on. Whereas building the relationship is a different process. And so the short term goal needs to be in place of what's going to happen and how it's going to position me for the longer term outcomes. It's not just this one transaction. It's relational.
One of the interesting things that I learned during the program is that feeling of we did so much critical self-reflection, which is pretty much part of anyone who's graduated from the program. It's part of their everyday life. But given that talking about the long-term goals and keeping critical reflection in mind and self-awareness, there's a level of, I don't know if it's just me, a burnout of constantly asking yourself, how I'm being perceived in this conversation, how are people looking at me, and how just to manage all of that. So how do you manage all of that going on in your mind?
Well, I don't think we should always be thinking about that. Otherwise, we're like super paranoid in the situation.
We live in New York, so I feel like
who's watching me, right? I think it's good to know how you want to show up and look at it afterwards and see what did I do to help me show up the way I wanted to or not. But I mean, how much is too much, right? I think each person has different amounts. I think it's always important to commend yourself for showing up and commend yourself for what you're doing and appreciate any achievement that you have, as small as it is. And I think sometimes, we berate ourselves for not getting everything we want, when in actuality, just showing up is half of it. They say that, but I really believe that. So even putting in the effort, even trying to get to the place where you need to be is good and something worth appreciating.
Do we have time for one more
Yeah.
question?
And I did want to add something too about the relational part. I remember, a few months ago I was at a conference, same conference, and a lot of the people there were hostage and crisis negotiators. And they had a very different take on relationship building, right? Because I don't want to be in a relationship with this guy. I want to get the hostage out. But the thing that they had to do was they had to engage and build trust and empathy with the person in order to get the hostage released. So it's still relational, even though you don't want to have a long-term relationship. So there are still relational qualities happening, and building rapport with the other person that's really critical.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Someone asked, they want to create a mentorship program, and that will include diverse individuals. Are there any drawbacks, in your opinion, to not inviting men to be mentors too? And what's your take on mentorship in general?
Mentorship? But I think, well, it depends on what you want from the relationship, right? I think it's important to have diversity. It's important to involve men and any gender orientation in there. If they have something that you want to learn, if they have ways of opening up doors and helping you understand how they perceive the world, because if you're only staying inside of your own community and not learning how others see the world, then you're missing that whole piece of diverse thinking. So it really depends on what you need. Sometimes you need an affinity support group, and so you want to have another woman as your mentor. It really depends on what stage of life and what you need from it. I can't say blanketly one or the other, but I think any kind of mentorship is good, but I think you really need to be focused on what is it you want to achieve from that mentorship relationship.
I'm going to just ask the last question. As a researcher, and we've gone through so many years of this research and have done studies on this topic, presentations, conference. When you were finishing this book, right, I'm sure at some point you had to say, this has to be done. I can't keep on researching and adding more content into this. I'm wondering, did you have any elements or pieces that you felt that would have been nice to cover that, would have been nice to include that, or any not missed opportunities, but something that you would have liked to include?
No, I'm really glad about closure. So when this book was done, it was done, and then there's a whole other life after it, which I didn't realize too. I mean, I've written other books, but not a solo book, and haven't really done the publicity as much as this. After the writing of the book, there's two other full-time jobs. There's the whole production of the book, which is the production, and then there's the publicizing the book, which is a whole other way of re-engaging with the material. So something like this, or doing podcasts and interviews and writing blogs and articles. So it keeps living on, and even though it's not in the book necessarily, I continue to refine some of the concepts depending on who I'm engaging with in the situation. So this is, one chapter of the book of life, so to speak, and so there's always more that's going to happen afterwards. So this is it. It's a package, done, printed, but there's more to continue with.
Fiction. No,
and my fiction,
your fiction,
yes,
your
my
fiction. Yes.
My next life, yes.
All right, so I am going to close the Q&A, but if you don't mind, I want to read a few lines from the intro in the book, which I thought sort of summarizes a good message, especially for women. How you act in negotiation is influenced by the story you tell yourself about who you are as a negotiator. Our stories of who we are developed and influenced over the years by the world around us. These stories shape our belief systems, and these beliefs, even if not conscious, determine our actions. So, in other words, it sounds like watch your self-talk because it becomes your thoughts. So you watch your thoughts because it becomes your actions. Watch your actions. It becomes your habit, and your habits they shape your life.
And your brain, right?
There you go. Well, that is all. Well, thank you, everyone, and I hope you all had a lovely evening.
Thank you, Kat. And I guess there's a book signing outside, right? Can make an announcement.
Oh, yes. There is a book signing outside, so if you haven't purchased it yet, you could get Beth's book and have it signed. You could also buy it for your girlfriends.
Thank you.